Happy coding.
Hey there, and Kevin here. Welcome to our next video in our series on Intro to Web Development. In this video, we will be learning about a new language called JavaScript. Um, so honestly, the best way I know how to talk about this stuff is to just dive in and start coding. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm over here in NeoCities, and this is just my dashboard where I have a few of the directories from the last few weeks, and I have my Scratch directory, which I've been using just to have a placeholder. So I'm going to go into that. And again, I encourage you to have a Scratch directory just kind of away from everything else, where you can just mess around and play with stuff as I work through this. But it's up to you. So I'm editing my Scratch page. I kind of cleared out what I had from last time and have kind of a placeholder in here. So I'm going to hit View, and if I look at the code, I have a style section with a single style rule. It selects the container class and adds some styling. And then in my HTML, I have a div with class container, and then an h1 and a p tag. And then that results in this placeholder website with my h1 and my p tag, and then my styling around my div to give it this border, kind of give it a width and center it. So that's kind of, using the techniques that we learned about in the last couple of weeks. So I have, let me set this up a little bit. So let me go, let me put this over here and make this window a little smaller. So this is kind of how I recommend coding, is by having your like editor area on the left and then your web page on the right, just so you can, that's annoying. Sure, that big. Just so you can sort of go back and forth really easily without having to switch through a bunch of tabs, but it's up to you. But now that I have this, I have my content over here where I have my HTML, which specifies the content, and then I have my CSS, which specifies the styling. So we have two different languages in this file. We have HTML, which is this kind of syntax where I have sort of opening and closing tags, and I have content, and I have things like attributes, and it's using things like the angle brackets to specify the opening and closing tags, and that's the kind of syntax, the symbols that I would expect to see in HTML. And then I have CSS, which with how I'm doing it now is in the style tag. I could have put this in a separate file, but for now it's just here. But inside of this style tag, which itself is HTML, inside of the style tag, I have CSS, or cascading style sheets, and this is a different language. And it's a little bit like different human languages, where in, I don't know, English, I use a certain set of characters, a certain set of like letters, a certain grammar, different words. And then in, I don't know, Spanish, I have slightly different letters, maybe like the nye with the squiggle over top, and different words, different grammar. The idea of coding languages is pretty similar. They have different rules, different words, different letters, different syntax. So in CSS, I have things like this selector, this selector, which selects a container class, and then I have style properties with values or with property names and property values, and separated by a colon. There's a semicolon in here with different words. So you have now sort of like spoken two languages, and this week in this video, I am going to introduce a third language. So HTML is a language that lets you specify the content, and you do that by specifying tags that specify like the type of content and then the content itself. And that's kind of one language. And then CSS lets you specify the styles for that content. So you select something in the page and then give it styles. And those languages are great. They are the foundation of web development, and all well and good, but they don't let you really specify like interactivity. You can do things like animations in CSS, at least, now you can. But if you want to do something like when I click a button, do this, or get this information from a user and do something with it, for that kind of thing, you're going to be using a third language called JavaScript. And that's what we are going to learn about now. So to use JavaScript, it's actually pretty similar to how you use CSS in that you start with a HTML tag. So in my HTML file, I'm going to give myself some white space. You can kind of put this tag wherever you want, but for now, I'm going to put it sort of in my head section, kind of right under my style tag. And this tag, it's a new tag. So I'm going to go kind of slow here where I will just type it out. And it is the script tag. So I'm going to open up my script tag. And generally what I do is I give myself some white space. And whoops, I should probably scroll down a little bit. I give myself some white space and then I have a closing tag. And I give myself some white space because I know that I'm going to type something in here. So I just start out with some empty lines. And now inside of this script tag, I am now writing in a different language, a language called JavaScript. So I'll get into the exact syntax of JavaScript in a second, but I want to sort of take a pause and talk about sort of a foundational layer of this kind of coding. And this is what we're about to do is we're about to start like really interacting with the computer and telling it like what to do and when to do it. What we've done so far is, it is telling the computer what to do, but it's kind of like specifying content, specifying styles, and you don't really have to worry about like the line by line nature of how it works. But with what we're about to do, you do have to be really aware of like when is stuff happening, what order is it happening in, how do I control that stuff? So in order to understand that, the way I think about it is your computer is like a really, really, really dumb assistant, like a personal assistant. And it follows your directions like really accurately, but it doesn't really think for itself. It doesn't have a ton of like, I don't know, like creative freedom in sort of interpreting what you tell it to. So if I think of, I don't know, I'm going to create like a recipe. What I would do if I wanted to hand that recipe to my assistant is I would be really clear with the instructions I'm giving it. So let's say I want to like bake a cake, or I want my assistant to bake a cake. I might do that by saying like, number one, like, I don't know, get 1 cup of sugar. And it's funny, it's going to like syntax highlight this like it's JavaScript. This is not JavaScript. I'm just kind of typing it out. Maybe I should have done this in Notepad or something. And maybe I would say like get 2 cups of flour. I don't actually bake anything, so I don't know if this is a ridiculous like ratio, but and then I might say like preheat oven to, I don't know, 350 degrees. And what I'm doing is I'm specifying a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, all that. And I'm being really specific in what I'm telling it to do. So just to be annoying, I'm going to change these numbers. And this is sort of how a computer works. When you give it code, it runs line by line by line, and it does what you tell it to. And so in my world where I have this assistant, if I would do something like, I don't know, say step 1 is get sugar, my assistant would not know how much sugar to get. And depending on, who my assistant is, they might have some kind of default that they go to, like, oh, when someone says get sugar, I'll just get a bag of sugar. Or they might come back and say, wait, how much sugar did you need me to get? Or they might, I don't know, like throw a tantrum and say, I don't know what to do with these instructions and I quit and this is too difficult. And your computer can do any three of those things, depending on exactly what you're trying to do with it. But keep that example in mind. Your computer is a very dumb assistant that follows exactly what you tell it to do, even if that's not really what you want it to do. And so just to get something working, I'm going to transition now into like actually writing JavaScript. So keep that example in mind. But exactly how I was giving my assistant like one step at a time, you can give your computer one step at a time. And you can think of your computer as like the browser or, you know, whatever application you're in. But I'm going to kind of oversimplify and say your computer is doing it because at the end of the day, it is your computer, whether that's a phone or whatever. But anyway, in order to give your computer a instruction, what you're generally going to be doing is something called calling a function. And this is what I consider like one of the most foundational building blocks in coding in computer science is calling a function to tell your computer what to do. So I'm going to call a function, and this is new syntax, so I'm going to, again, be kind of slow. I am writing JavaScript, and I'm going to call a function, and I do that by writing the name of the function. In this case, I'm going to call the alert function. And then after the name of the function, I'm going to open up a parenthesis. And then inside of these parentheses, I'm going to add like more information. This is called a parameter or an argument, but I think of it as more information that the function needs. And in this case, the alert function, it shows a little like pop-up box. And exactly like when I had my assistant and I couldn't just say get flour, I had to say get exactly this much flour. I have to tell the computer, what do you want in the alert box? And for now, I'm just going to write like a number. So I'm saying alert 42, the number 42. So show me a pop-up with the number 42 in it. And I'm going to close my parenthesis here. And then I'm going to add a semicolon. And this is a single line of code that calls a function. That function name is alert. And the argument or parameter that I'm passing in is 42. And so if I zoom out a little bit, I can look at like sort of how this relates to the rest of the page. And I'm in an HTML page. Inside that HTML, I have a bunch of, well, HTML tags and content and stuff. I have a style tag, which specifies CSS. And now I have a script tag, which contains JavaScript, which is telling the computer to do something. And then I have more sort of HTML content down below. So if I go, well, first I want to hit save. And if I go over here and refresh, what I expect to happen is I expect to see a sort of pop-up box show up and show me the number 42. So I'm going to hit refresh. And there it is. My website here says 42. It's kind of hard to see probably, but there it is. And that's because I told it what to do. I told it to do that. I can also, let's see if this works. I can also add multiple. So if I have like, I want it to do more than one thing, I do that by adding some white space. In this case, I'm going to put it on the next line, and I can say alert, I don't know, like 1000, and close my parenthesis and then semicolon and hit save. I think this will work. It might, like, I might have a thing that says like this page is trying to show you too many pop-ups because that's annoying, but let me just see what happens. I'm going to refresh and I see 42 there, and then I hit OK. And yeah, okay, now I see 1000, and yeah, here's the checkbox I was worried about. This is my browser being like, hey, this website's being annoying and showing you a lot of pop-ups. Do you want to just block them? But it does show 1000, and I can hit OK because I'm saying, hey, first show an alert with 42, then show an alert with 1000. And it's just following that code line by line. Okay, so that is calling a function and passing it in a parameter or an argument. And so far, that argument has been a number, either 42 or 1000, but chances are probably you want to work with more than just like raw numbers, and you want to work with things like text. And so to do that, we are going to use something called a string which is a different like piece of data. So a number is a data type, and string is a different data type, and a string is just words. It's just text. But you can't just type like hello world here because that's just not the syntax for it. So in order to pass in a string of characters, a string of letters, you have to use either quotation marks or a single quote. In JavaScript, you generally use the single quote as the default, and then you type whatever text you want. In this case, I'll say hello world, and then you need to close out your quotation mark, and that's all you need to do. So here is my string. I'm passing that in as the argument to the alert function inside these parentheses. And so now if I hit save over here and then I refresh, now I see hello world instead of like 42 or 1000. So this is like working with text. And there's a couple ways to do this. So for example, like if I had like, I don't know, I'll say like, hi, I'm Kevin. This is going to get messed up because I have a quotation, like an apostrophe inside of my string, which has apostrophes on the outside. So it says, oh, this must be the string. And then I don't know what this stuff is. So there's a couple ways to do this. One way is you can have a like left leading slash in front of this, and now this will work. The other way to do it is you can use like the double quotation marks on the outside like this. So all of that will work. And if I refresh, I see, hi, I'm Kevin. Even though it contains that single quote, it's still all good. Okay, so that is using strings and a couple different ways to format that. I'll change this back to hello world just for funsies. And refresh just to make sure that works. And it does. So hello world. Okay, so that is showing a pop-up. And actually that's going to get us pretty far this week. I think that's kind of where we're going to stay for a minute. There are many other things you can do. And we'll get into like making your page like truly interactive. But for now, the way I will sort of show that there are more than, there's more than just the alert function in JavaScript. There's actually many, many, many functions in JavaScript. For now, I will try a different one, which is called document.write. So I'm going to call the document.write function, which is, a function in JavaScript by writing its name, document.write. And then I'm going to open a parenthesis, and then I could put like a number in here. So I could say 42 in here, and then I'll close my parenthesis and then put a semicolon. And if I save this and then hit refresh, yeah, indeed, there is my 42 up there, all the way at the top. And so this is a way of outputting different sort of content to the page from JavaScript, and I can change this into a string. So this is kind of saying like exactly how I said, like preheat the oven to a certain number of degrees. Now I'm saying document.write, and I'm giving it the value that that step needs. And I'll try something like, I don't know, hello from JavaScript, and that's off the side, but zoom out maybe. Yeah, hello from JavaScript. Exclamation point, and I'll close out my string, and then I have my closing parenthesis, and then my semicolons. That should be good. So if I hit save and then refresh, I see hello from JavaScript. Yay. And I will say that I'm using this document.write function as an example. You should probably in real life almost never use it, but it's handy for things like testing out and like just practicing. So, that will work. If you look here, you'll notice that like it prints out at the top of the page, and that's because when your browser or when your computer runs this code, it's running it line by line. It's reading it in and saying, okay, I get like here, and I say set the title. I get here, I load this file that contains CSS. I think this file is empty for now. I get here, so I start loading this CSS, .container, cool. I get here, so I run this code. This code adds hello from JavaScript to the page. Cool, that's there. And Then I get down here and finally I get to the container. So it starts to build that out. It prints the hello world to the page and then the P and then closes them all out. So like the positioning of this really matters because the order changes like where stuff happens or when stuff happens. So just in this example, I'll say I can add a new script tag right in here if I really want to. I would say generally you don't want to do this, but just to show you how it all fits together, I'm going to open up a new script tag by typing the script sort of keyword there. And then I'm going to close out my script tag with some white space. And then in here, I'm going to call the document.write function, document.write, and then I'm going to open up my parenthesis. I'll open up my string. And again, what I often do is I'll open up both parentheses and then I'll add my semicolon and then I'll open up both, well, open and close my parenthesis and then I'll open and close my string. And then in here, I'll type my string. And this is just a way for me to guarantee that like, hey, did I close that out or not? I just do it like right at the beginning. But in here, I'll say like, hi from the middle of the page. And what I'm expecting to happen if I save this is as the computer reads through the code line by line, it's going to get to the H1, it's going to print that out on the page, and then it's going to get to this script tag. It's going to do this, which is going to add that to the page, and then it's going to continue, add the P tag, so on and so forth. So save that and refresh. And there it is, hi from the middle of the page. This is being printed out from JavaScript. But generally you probably don't want to do that, but you can just to test things out. Okay, so I want to get rid of that and I'm back up here to my script tag and I have a document.write function here and I'll call maybe one more function just to show you that there are other options out there. And this next function will become, well, I would call it your best friend, but it's more like probably your frenemy because it's really handy when you're debugging, when you have like, when your code is sort of not working how you want it to, and you want to just kind of confirm like where you are. This next function is really handy. So I'm going to kind of just get us back to the state we were in. There we go. And that function is the console.log function. So here, I'm going to call console.log, and it's very similar to the other functions that we have just seen, where I could give this a number if I really want to, but usually what I'm doing is giving it text. So I'm going to open up my string. I'm going to also close everything out while I'm here, and I'm just going to say like, hello from console.log. Hello from console.log. And I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to refresh. And nothing happened. And why is that? That is because console.log doesn't do anything that's visible inside the page. Instead, what it does is, I want to make this a little bigger. I'll make this whole thing big. I'm zoomed in already. Yeah. Instead, what it does is it prints what I gave to that function as a parameter to the JavaScript console. And where is that? It's in your developer tools, which we have talked about a few times in the past couple of weeks. So depending on your browser, how you get there is a little different. You might right click and hit inspect, or you can go up here to like the menu. Depending on your browser, it might be in a different place. But if I go to more tools, here I am in Firefox and then web developer tools, they open up the same thing essentially. But if I open that up, then by default, it'll generally take you to the inspector, which lets you like interact with the stuff in the page. And that's handy for debugging things like CSS and HTML. But for JavaScript, your best friend is now the console, the JavaScript console. So if I go here, indeed, I see hello from console.log. And I get a little warning about using document.write because it's kind of an older function that you're not really supposed to use, but hey, it's fine. So I get this hello from console.log because in my code, I have this line of code where I say console.log, hello from console.log. And so it shows up in the JavaScript console. And this JavaScript console is super duper important, and I'll talk about why. Actually, I'll talk about why right now. Yeah, why not? So I want to go back to having like an alert function, alert, and I'll just say hello world. And if I save this, and I want to get my windows back to a normal sort of configuration. Sure. And if I refresh, I see my alert. Okay. So what would happen if, I don't know, there's a bunch of different like sort of syntax issues I could introduce. So let's say what would happen if I forgot to close out my string? Let's find out. I'm going to save that and refresh. And nothing happens. And this is going to happen to you constantly as you're coding JavaScript. You're going to write some code and you're going to refresh your page and nothing will happen when you like do the thing that you are expecting. And what gives? And the answer to that is generally the web is like pretty forgiving with error messages. And so if there's an error in your JavaScript, it doesn't like bother the user with a big scary warning. It doesn't really indicate anything went wrong. Instead, it shows up in the JavaScript console. So if I open that back up, I'm going to go down to more tools and web developer tools, and I have the console open, and here's the error message. And in this case, it says uncaught syntax error, quotation mark string literal contains an unescaped line break. And that is kind of a confusing error message, but it's basically saying, hey, I was reading this code. This is the equivalent of, this is your assistant saying like, I didn't understand your instructions at all, so I'm going to throw a fit and I'm going to quit. And I'm not going to do anything. But what it's trying to tell you is I was reading this line of code and I got to the alert and okay, that makes sense. I got to the opening quotation marks, so that's cool. And then I started reading this string, but then I got to a new line, which is like, when I hit enter here, there's just at the end of this line, there's a new line character. And wait, what? I don't know what to do anymore. And it's because in this case, I didn't close out my string. And there are other ways that this can kind of happen. So what happens if I don't close out my my parenthesis? Well, if I close this and I refresh, again, sort of nothing happens. There's no indicator that anything went wrong. But if I open up my browser tools, there is my error. It says syntax error, which means there's something wrong with the code itself. Missing closing parenthesis after argument list, which is this thing. And so it's saying, hey, I read this, but then at the end of it, you didn't close out your parenthesis, so I don't know what to do, so I quit forever. So if I add that back in, and now if I refresh, now I will see my alert. And if I go to the JavaScript console, more tools and web developer tools, I don't have an error. I have this like weird warning because of, probably because of, I actually don't know. But the web has a lot of various warnings. This is just saying like, hey, there's something that you might care about. Oh, it's because I still have a document.write. Right. It doesn't love the document.write, but that's something that I'm kind of ignoring because it's not actually an error. It's just a warning that I'm choosing to ignore. But there's otherwise no error messages and it works. It shows the pop-up. Cool. So that is the like alert function, the console.log function, the JavaScript console. And so like keep that JavaScript console in mind. That is going to be your new best friend. Well, like I said, that kind of a frenemy, where that's where you'll go when you're having an error. So I actually usually just generally just keep it open all the time when I'm developing. So my when I'm developing, my screen looks kind of like this. Often I'm in a different kind of editor, but like generally I have my code on the left and I have my web page in the middle, and I have like the console or the browser tools either sort of on the right side, or you can kind of pop them up and put them on the bottom if you want to, or pop them up in your own window. Usually I have a couple different monitors going, so you can play around with what works for your setup, but I usually have my JavaScript console open like almost constantly. So don't forget that that's a thing because it will come in handy. Okay, so a couple more things to chat through. So that is JavaScript and calling functions, and you can call multiple functions. You know where to look for errors, all that good stuff. The next thing I want to talk about is the idea of external JavaScript. And this is really similar to what we already talked about with CSS. And I can have this style tag in here, and then inside of that, I can have my CSS content. And this really comes in handy when you have multiple HTML pages and you want the same styles on all of your HTML pages. But you can also, you can have this, but if you want this to be on multiple pages, generally you're going to put your CSS in a separate file. So this line of code is loading a style.css file, which, I could move my CSS out there, and I'm not going to do that. But I can basically do the exact same thing with a script tag. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to steal this line of code for now. So my script tag is empty. So what you'll often see is something like this with script and then immediately closing it. And then inside of the opening script tag, you add an attribute called src or source, and then an equal sign, and then quotation marks. And then in here, you give it a file name, and by convention, it's usually like script.js or scripts.js. You can call it whatever you want. But for now, I'm just going to call it script.js, and I'll hit save. And this won't actually do anything because I haven't actually created that file. But the next thing I want to do is go up to my directory, and I'm going to make this a little bigger, and sure. So in here, if I go to new file, I'm going to say script.js, create, and that's here. I'm going to edit that. So I'm now editing script.js, and I always just give myself a ton of white space because I don't like how it's formatted by default. And in here, I can put my JavaScript. Now, I don't need my opening script tag. So because this is already not HTML, this whole file is going to be JavaScript. And in this case, I only really had like that one function call. So I'm going to put that back. And I'm going to say alert hello world. And I'm going to save this. And so if I sort of think about how these things are related, maybe I'll open this up in a new tab and open up index.html. So I have index.html here, and then I have script.js over here, and then I have my window over there. So in my index.html file, I am loading my index.html file. I'm loading the HTML here. I load this empty CSS. I load this empty CSS file. I load this style tag, and then I get here and I say, here's a script tag, and load this script.js file. And then the browser or computer will go to that file, load whatever JavaScript is in here. In this case, I'm going to call alert, and then it'll come back here to the index.html file and keep going and keep loading the page. So if I refresh, I indeed see my hello world pop up because it's over here in the script.js file. So that's an option. I don't think I'm going to require that or anything, but it can make your life easier because you're separating out your HTML and your CSS and your JavaScript. So actually, now that I say that, maybe I will take this out just to demonstrate like the whole thing. So I'm going to take my CSS out and sort of move that back to my my style.css file, edit, and I don't like how that's formatted. And if I just paste that in and fix my formatting a little bit, hit save. So this gets a little messy in NeoCities because each separate file is its own tab, but this is how I would maybe recommend it, is like just having each tab open to each file. So you can quickly switch back and forth, and you can, make a change and save and stuff. But now in my index.html, I have my HTML. I get to this line, and this loads the style.css file. So it goes over here, loads this style into the browser. It gets to this line. It runs the code in the script.js file. In this case, I'm showing an alert. Then it comes back here and keeps trucking and gets to, eventually the H1 and the P tag. Okay, so let's see all of that in action. It won't be too exciting because it's exactly what we already have. But if I hit refresh, I see the hello world, and I see my welcome to my website. Now my styles did go away, which makes me believe that I probably messed something up. So this is, I'll say an example of the kind of thing that happens all the time. I just made a change and I expected something to happen and that thing didn't happen. In this case, if I look at it, like I no longer have the styling for my container. I see that this is an H1 and this is a P. So I'm guessing I just named something wrong. So I'm looking here at this and I see that this is called style.css. So I'm just going to confirm this is actually called style.css. Style.css. Maybe I just need to refresh again. Maybe not. Sometimes what happens, especially with CSS files, is they kind of get like stuck because of the cache. Your browser basically remembers the files that it downloaded. There's a way to do that. Let's see if I go to more tools. Maybe in web developer tools, there's something about the cache. Let's find out together. I never remember where this stuff is. Maybe here. I can disable the cache. I don't know if that's what I want. Let's try that and see if that works. No. Oh yeah, okay, that did work. But what's the best way to do that? You know what? I'm gonna actually search for it because this is a thing that you might encounter. So what you're looking for is what's called a cache clearing refresh. So if I go to Firefox cache clearing refresh, let me just remember how to do this. I know in Chrome it's like Control F5, but let's see. All right, Control F5. Oh, it's the same thing. Or Control Shift R. Oh, I like that. So Control Shift R. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Okay, so the reason that I didn't see my styles sort of immediately is because when I'm loading separate files like this, your browser basically, the first time you load a file like a style.css file or script.js file, it like downloads it and stores it in something called the cache. And by default, like there's a certain number of minutes that it like will keep them around. And so if you change it, you either have to wait for the cache, which no one actually really does, or you clear your cache. And the default sort of shortcut for that in Firefox and Chrome is Control Shift R, which says, hey, refresh this page and also like refetch all of the files that are in the cache. So, all right, that's good to know. I'm going to try to remember that from now on because that's really annoying. Okay, so I've got my external JavaScript, and the next thing I want to do is talk through the idea of creating your own functions and then hooking them up to the page. So what I have right now is I have this script.js file, and over here I am calling the alert function, and that's happening as soon as I load my page. Hello world. And maybe that's what you want, but chances are you actually want to do something when the user like clicks a button or does something else, like types a key or something like that, like provides some kind of input. So to do that, I'm going to do a couple of things. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, in my JavaScript, and you could do this if you were still in the script tag, but I'm going to do it over here in this file. I'm going to define a function, and that's a fancy way of saying I'm going to bundle up my code in a named unit, a named function, so that I can call my own function whenever I want. So in here, in my JavaScript, I'm going to type that out. So to define a new function, I'm going to use the function keyword, and then I'm going to have a space, and then I'm going to give my function a name. And traditionally, these start with a lowercase letter. It doesn't really matter, but traditionally, it's a lowercase letter, usually a verb. So I'm going to say like say hello world like this. And the capitalization is like the first letter is lowercase, and then there's like uppercase sort of after that. And then in here, I'm going to just open up my parenthesis. And in this case, I'm going to immediately close my parenthesis. And then I want to give a an opening curly brace. So open that, and you've seen that character before from CSS. And then I'm going to give myself some white space, and then I'm going to have a closing curly bracket, curly brace. And in here, so far my function is empty, but let's say that this is what I wanted to do when that function is called. And maybe just to make it interesting, I will also add like a console.log function. So I'll say console.log. I'll just say hello world. Hello world from the console. Okay. So this is telling the computer, define a new function, call that function say hello world, and when say hello world is called, call these two functions. Call console.log and then call alert. And this is similar to, I don't know, like if you have your recipe, you are maybe writing it down on a piece of paper and like putting that in a recipe book. And at the top of that page, it's like, this is the recipe for baking a cake. And so when you say, hey, assistant, bake a cake, the assistant can go, oh, let me look up that recipe and then follow the steps there. So it's a way of bundling up your instructions so that your assistant, in this case, your browser, knows what to do when you call that function. So there's a few ways I can sort of demo this. Maybe the way I'll do it is, so exactly how I can call alert hello world. Like right below this, I'm going to say hello world. I'm going to call that function exactly how I called the alert function. Now I'll say here, I'm not putting anything in the parentheses because in this case, I don't need to because this doesn't take a parameter. I'm just giving it the hard-coded strings here. But there's other ways to do that. But if I save all of this and I refresh over here, I will see hello world. And if I go to the console, I will also see it over there. Console, hello world from the console. But that's not, that's not very interesting because that doesn't really give me much that I couldn't already do just by putting these out here. So I'm going to get rid of that. And now by default, nothing will happen. Well, the page will load, but no JavaScript will show up. This is not an error. The console is not complaining about anything. No errors, no warnings. But the reason it's not doing anything is because I haven't actually called this function. And so rather than calling it from here, which is happening when the page loads, I want to call it when the user clicks a button. So the first thing I'll do is in my HTML, I will create a button. So I'll just say button. So this is a normal HTML tag, and the content for that, actually I'll close out my button first. And the content will be like the text of the button. So I'll say like, click me. I'll save that and I'll refresh over here. And okay, I've got my button. And when I click my button, nothing is happening. There's no errors in the console. And that's because I haven't told the computer, when you click this button, call this function. And so the way to do that is by adding a attribute, which we've seen a bunch of times now, by adding a space inside the opening tag. And then I'm going to have my attribute, which is on click, and an equal sign, and then quotation marks. These are double quotation marks. And then inside the quotation marks, I am going to write JavaScript. And now I actually could, in here, just say alert, and I'll say hi. And I have to close out my parenthesis, and I always add a semicolon. You don't actually need it here, but I always add one just to remind myself. And so if I save this, I think this will work because I'm saying, here's a button, and when the user clicks, call this JavaScript function alert with hi. So if I click me, I see hi, and that works, but this is kind of unruly. This is like really hard to edit because you're editing it like inside this tiny little bit here, and you're editing it like inside of a string attribute. So usually you try to keep this like really minimal. And so you try to just have this be like a single function with 0 parameters. So in here, I'm going to call the function that I created over in my JavaScript, say hello world. I'm going to say hello world. And I've got to have my opening and closing parenthesis. And I always add the semicolon here, even though you don't technically need it. So I'm going to hit save. I'm going to hit refresh. And when I click me, I'm going to see hello world. And I'm going to see in the console, hello world from the console, exactly like when I had it right at the beginning. But now it waits until I say click me. On page load, nothing happens. It loads the page. When I have click me, when I click me, I see hello world. Cool. Just a couple more things to say about this. One is, so earlier we were talking about the document.write function. I will say when you are at this stage where you have your JavaScript running only after the user does something, you generally really don't want to use the document.write function because I'll show you what happens. Document.write, I don't know, hello world again. And I'll save that. And again, like when I click the button, this function will be called and the computer will do 1, 2, 3 things. Oh, and I'm getting a little warning there. Like, yeah, modern browsers are really suspicious of this function because it's like old and can be used to do weird stuff, but it's still handy while you're learning. But anyway, if I hit refresh over here and then I click the click me button, I see hello world because that's first I print it to the console, then I say alert hello world. And if I click OK, it'll then run the next line and my page goes away. And that's because if you call document.write sort of like after the page loads, after like the user clicks a button, it deletes the whole page and starts over from scratch. So we use document.write as a way to just kind of explore the syntax, but generally you're not going to be using that inside of a function like that. So now if I refresh, it should go away, and yep, it does. Okay, cool. So the very last thing I'll mention is, so far I have a single button that calls a single function, and that function then can call like more functions. But I can have many of these. So in my JavaScript, I'm going to define a new function, and I don't know, I didn't plan this ahead, so I'll say like function, I'll say like, oh, I need to spell it right, don't I? Function, I don't know, say goodbye. And in this case, I won't have any parameter there. That's fine for what we're doing for now. And opening curly brace, some white space, and a closing curly brace. And in here, I'll say console.log goodbye. And I'll say goodbye from console. And then in here, I will say alert. I don't know, I'll just say goodbye. Okay. So I'm calling the alert function, opening my parenthesis, giving it a string, closing my parenthesis, and then ending it with semicolon. Save that and refresh. And well, nothing will happen because I haven't added a button. So click me, it still says hello world because I have hooked that up to my HTML this way. And maybe I'll change this text to hello. And then I'll have a new button where I specify the on click, set that equal to quotation mark. And then in here, I'll say goodbye. Open and close my parenthesis. I always add a semicolon. close my string attribute, close my opening HTML tag, and here I'll just say like goodbye, and then I'll close my button tag. So I'll save that, and I'll refresh, and I have hello and goodbye. So if I click hello, I see hello world. If I click goodbye, I see goodbye. And I also see this warning that's saying like, hey, this thing is showing you a lot of pop-ups. Do you want me to not let that happen anymore? In this case, I'm fine with it because I'm the one creating them. And I can go back and forth like hello world, hit OK, hello again, hello world. And this is happening because I have sort of hooked up my HTML to my JavaScript by saying onClick equals say hello world, and it knows to look in here. Well, the first thing it does is it loads this file and says, hey, create this function, and just kind of keep that in mind as a thing we can do. Create this function, keep that in mind as a thing we can do. And then later when it says, when the browser sees onClick of this button, it says, aha, I remember that that's a thing, and it does the thing. Okay, so I think that's about as far as I'm going to go in this. And so what we've learned is, well, JavaScript. We are learning a third language, and we're kind of keeping it limited to just a couple of functions just for now, because there's a lot you can do and it can get really overwhelming. But just to practice the syntax of JavaScript and practicing sort of hooking up your HTML to your JavaScript, that's what we're going to kind of focus on this week. But what I'll say is, what we have done is actually like what I would call like the core of web development. We have HTML, we have CSS, and we have JavaScript, and they all sort of work together to create a sort of final web page. So I have this page, it has styles, it has some buttons, those buttons call JavaScript, and that JavaScript tells the computer to do something. And this is like foundationally how web development works. So even though we're keeping it limited to like just a couple functions, the overall thing that we're doing this week is huge, really important, and we will continue building it through the rest of this class. So, all right, I'll stop there, and in the next video, I'll show you sort of how to use all of this to create a project. But for now, I'll say until next time, happy coding.